Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good, thank you. Happy solstice. I think we're sitting on it right now, pretty close. The solstice is the time when the length of the days increases little by little, depending on where you live. It's, I believe, the oldest, longest celebrated holiday, if you call it that, on the planet. As far back as we know, practically, the solstice was recognized and celebrated in some way. And in fact, our celebration of Christmas is tied somewhat to the experience of the solstice. To the ancients, one of the things that the solstice represented was that of hope, that in the midst of the longest, darkest, coldest night of the year, the sun begins to gain strength. It's a turning point. It stops receding, starts moving forward, getting more energy on the earth day by day. Light has long been a metaphor for awareness. Let there be light, let there be awareness, you know. That shed some light on it for you, you know. Let's put some light on the subject, you know. Light and awareness, attention. So today I want to talk about a particular aspect of awareness, and that is that awareness is a creative act. We think that awareness reveals what's there. If we're lucky, if our awareness is clear enough. But if we take our attention off of that, we certainly believe that that object or that person or that whatever we were looking at will still be there, right? When you go back to your car, you imagine your car will be there. And you imagine that it exists now, even though you can't see it. But that's only one way of experiencing. If we look at reality in the minutest, smallest degree possible, we see something very different. And I'd like to read to you, I apologize that it's a fairly long quote, but it's a good one, from Fred Alan Wolf, who is a former physics professor. He says, "What do we mean by reality? We usually mean the world that we sense, the world out there that is made up of things that we can see, hear, taste, touch, real, substantial objects. We take it for granted that these things would exist even if we were not there. We believe that our observation simply verifies a reality that already exists, right? But that isn't what quantum physics seems to be telling us, at least from the point of view of what's known as the Copenhagen School of Complementarity. According to the tenets of this, Niels Bohr and a number of very well-known scientists developed this back in the 1920s and 30s, I believe. According to that school of complementarity, there is no reality until that reality is perceived. Boink. The reason for this paradox, at least at the atomic level, is that there is no clear dividing line between us and the reality that appears to exist outside of ourselves. Instead, reality depends upon what and how we choose to observe. Reality depends upon what and how we choose to observe. These choices, in turn, depend upon our minds, and more specifically, the content of our thoughts. Interesting, huh? Now, this is not written by a Buddhist. It's not written by a mystic, a Hindu. It's written by a Western scientist. So, awareness is creative. When the sun comes up and shines its light on the sunflower, it doesn't just reveal the sunflower, but it brings it to life. And so awareness is much like light, that it not only brings clarity, but it brings life to what we're engaged in. The way we experience life is the object of our awareness. And at the microscopic level, maybe the macroscopic, I don't know, but certainly at the quantum level, everything we see is molded, I won't say created, but it's molded by our own awareness. It's kind of like what they're saying is that reality is like a block of clay. We don't create that block of clay, but we mold that block of clay into whatever shape we choose by our thoughts, words, desires, and actions. So that's taking very basic theology, creative theology. God's molding us out of a lump of clay. And in a sense, that's been tied back to the findings of quantum physicists. Awareness is creative. I want to look at this too from on the level of psychology. Getting a little closer to home, maybe. Carl Jung, among others, articulated how awareness of the unconscious will change the unconscious. When we become aware of something that was hitherto within us, yet unconscious, our awareness of it begins to change it immediately. And Jung had a, to me, is a psychological law. He didn't phrase it as such, but he had this principle that I think is very powerful. He says, our attitude toward the unconscious determines how it appears to us. Isn't that interesting? Our attitude toward the unconscious determines how it appears to us. So Jung is saying the same thing that Fred Alan Wolf is, only in a different arena. Jung is saying it in regard to the mind, and Wolf is saying it in regard to quantum reality. The common denominator is awareness. If we hate or fear something within ourselves, it will feel and appear and act almost demonically. Or it's at least like a villain, you know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, classic shadow. But the shadow is evil, bad, only to the extent that we see it that way. That's what's so fascinating, is that the unconscious is very much alive, but the way it appears to us depends upon how we choose to see it. You know, the classic example of if you have a dream where there's a monster chasing you. You know, if you can, in the dream or in therapeutic work afterwards, learn to face that monster, or as many teachers say in the Buddhist tradition, have tea with the monster. As we make friends with the demons, the monsters, they transform into something else. As we welcome, as in Rumi's guest house, you know, welcome every experience as it comes in. Ironically, as we welcome fear and anger, it no longer becomes fear and anger. It will reflect to us something else. Classic example is if there's something that we're repressing, I'll just speak from my own life experience. If one was experiencing, one named me, was experiencing depression, despair, and then when you bring light onto that, as I did, that began to morph into sadness and into anger. Despair and depression are symptoms. They're like ice, they're frozen. Emotions are alive. They have a life cycle. But our depressions, repressions, wholeness. They're not alive, they're frozen. Or if they're alive, they're in suspended animation. So, as we bring compassion to all parts of ourselves, as we bring compassion to the fear, the anger, the feelings of hatred, they will change into more fundamental parts of our human nature that, when recognized and accepted, become our allies, our friends, so that our anger morphs into power and a sense of authority and the ability to set boundaries, to say no, to protect ourselves, to have agency in the world, to impact the world. All of that was actually frozen into the Depression. It was the same thing. It was the same energy. It just revealed itself as depression because we were afraid of it or hated it. So the work we're doing here is very powerful as we simply open up to each experience. Even at the physical level, when we bring awareness to the ailments in the body, that awareness itself may begin to change it. Many teachers have told me, and I've experienced in some of my own retreats, that in the longer retreats in particular, it's not uncommon for people to experience alleviation of symptoms of chronic illness or ailments. And John Kabat-Zinn, whom many of you have heard of, he made a career and I should say empire to a degree, out of mindfulness's, the attention's power on healing the physical body. And in his books, he goes into great detail on as to how awareness is a catalyst in healing. It's not about miracles, it's not about anything magic. It's simply the fact that awareness is a creative act. And in our own life experience, you know, if you have a ache in your shoulder or pain in the back, just bring a gentle awareness to it. See what happens. You can do it right now. If you don't have an ache, you can borrow one of mine. But just whatever you're feeling in your body. And just notice as you pay attention to it. With compassion, it begins to change. I think there's countless times someone has said to me, I can't come to Sangha, or I can't do this sitting at a retreat because I have this headache, an awful headache. I say, well, would you be willing to do a headache meditation? Make that headache the object of your meditation rather than watching the breath. be present to that headache. I don't think there's one time when someone hasn't come back to me and said their headache was gone. You see. You know, maybe it comes back, who knows? But a headache is not a thing, it's an activity. Headache in many ways is what we do. So we begin to see that with every piece of awareness, we get closer to seeing what's real. And there's a wonderful practice in Korean Zen, and it's a practice of simply sitting in the question of, what is this? What is this? Bring awareness to your body. What is this? Bring awareness to your mind. What is this? Bring awareness to an ache in your body. What is this really? What's the reality of what this is? Awareness is like a solvent. It dissolves all that's not real. And the practice that we do is called vipassana. Insight meditation is translated from the Pali word vipassana, which means seeing into reality. And ultimately, that's what our work is about. It's about seeing the reality of ourself and the reality of the world as we experience it. So I close now with my blessing and prayer. May all beings be happy. May all beings know the light of awareness. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you for sharing your practice with us.